Okay, let's start then. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to the first talk of the spring lecture series of the Division of Landscape Architecture at the University of Hong Kong. My name is Cecilia Chuo, a faculty member in the division. And together with me here is my colleague, Natalia Echeverry, who is also a co-organizer of the series. I will first give a brief introduction to the theme of the series before passing on to Natalia to introduce the list of lectures and also to our speaker tonight. So the thematic title of the series is called Assembling Futures, which implies that we're going to focus on future practice and more specifically on the role of heritage and landscape architecture practice in shaping future environments. Now, clearly, we all know that our professional practices have always been fundamentally engaged with reshaping existing environments for future use. But the precise relationships between these projects and the future, as well as their users, are still somewhat under-theorized. How do the increasingly uncertain conditions of the present affect the ways we value, manage, design, and imagine the future? How does the era of climate change force us to reconceive the notions of nature and culture? How do different practices enact different realities in the long and short terms? And what kind of knowledge do we need to acquire in order to create alternative future environmental futures? We're really excited to have a great lineup of lectures engaging with these questions. By attending to how different projects reassemble the relationships between different human and material agents across different scales, we hope that each talk in the series will encourage critical reflections on the competing visions of building future worlds in the face of growing uncertainty and unfolding environmental crises. That sounds a bit heavy. So let me now pass to Natalia to introduce the lecture topics of the series. Natalia?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first lecture of the lecture series. We have a very exciting group of speakers this spring. So I'm going to go quickly over who is going to be speaking. It's important to understand that we have some of these lectures will be on Zoom, some of them will be face-to-face, and there will be in different venues. So we're starting today with Chuo Li. Next week we have on February 28th Montira Horayangura Unakul, who's the advisor of Southeast Asia Regional Center for Archaeology and Fine Arts and Siamese Heritage Trust. She will be lecturing in Knowles Building 419 at 6:30. That same week, on March 2nd, we have Man Barua, who is a senior lecturer in human geography in the Department of Geography at University of Cambridge. This lecture will be on Zoom. Then, I guess 2 weeks later, we'll have, after reading week, we'll have Peter Vestra, who is the founding partner and senior landscape architect of Lola. And this lecture will be face-to-face on Knowles Building 419 at 6:30. And for the next lecture, we'll have Richard Engelhardt, and that's on March 29th. This lecture he is the visiting professor in the Division of Landscape Architecture currently, and he's also the former UNESCO Regional Advisor for Culture in Asia and the Pacific. This lecture is in Tycoon and will require registration. So I think we will send updates of each of these lectures once the posters are prepared. And then the last lecture that we have is very exciting, which is Gunther Vogt, and he's the director of Vogt Landscape Architects, and he's a professor and chair of landscape architecture at ETH Zurich. This will be on April 19th, and this is also face-to-face in Knowles Building in room 419. So now I think we'll be updating you'll be getting emails with the updates of each of these lectures. So we can start with Chuo Li. Let me just so I'm going to introduce the speaker tonight. So Dr. Chuo Li is an associate professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture at Mississippi State University. She received a MA in Landscape Architecture from University of Wisconsin and a PhD in Landscape Architecture from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Her research interests are focused on landscape history, cultural landscape studies, and environmental behaviors. She's the lead author of 13 peer-reviewed journal articles and 1 referee book chapter. And the topics of her publications include cultural landscape of urban ethnic communities, heritage conservation, urban park design, and active living. Her publications have appeared in top-tier journals, including Landscape Research, Journal of Landscape Architecture, Cities, etc. She has served as the journal reviewer for numerous journals, and she currently serves as the executive editor board for Landscape Architecture Frontier. Dr. Li is the co-track chair of the Research and Methods track of the Council of Educators in Landscape Architecture, CELA, and she received an Outstanding Leadership Award in 2019 and the Most Outstanding Faculty Member of the Year Award for 2018 and 19 in the Mississippi State University. So welcome, Chuo Li. So I'll pass the screen to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Natalia and Cecilia. Thank you for the kind introduction. Maybe should I share my screen first?
Yes. Just 1 second because I'm trying.
Give me a second.
Yeah, into here. There.
All right. Okay, can everybody see my screen now? Okay, thank you. Well, I actually have briefly visited University of Hongkong in early 2020, right at the moment when the COVID has an outbreak. So I'm very thankful for this opportunity to reconnect with faculty and students at HKU. It's just a great opportunity that I'm able to sharing my work on the rural China. So the topic of my today is about conservation of the indigenous water system in rural China. This is a collaborative work with Professor Chen Hong. He's from Anhui University. So he was a visiting scholar to our department. So when we talk about, all the just beautiful villages in Anhui Province, and then we think that it will be a very exciting project for us to work together, regarding how we can preserve and also conserve these historic landscape in the rural villages in China. So give you a little bit context and the problems that we have, what happened in the rural China nowadays. So since the 1980s, there is a rapid economic development and population growth in not just in the Chinese cities, but also the rural area of China. And there is this, fast urbanization and the changes of industrial and agricultural practice, which has significantly changed the rural landscape. So by 2010, hundreds traditional villages along Yellow River and Yangtze River, they disappeared daily. And this process of urbanization and the changes also affect the hydrologic cycle by constructing massive flood, infrastructure for flood control, water supply, irrigation, and hydropower. So traditionally, the rural residents, they rely on rivers, streams, lake, ponds, rain, and wells for water use. But since the 1980s, Chinese government has launched this nationwide campaign to construct large-scale water infrastructure in order to improve the water supply and sanitation as a response to the population growth and urbanization in the rural area. In 2016, centralized water supply coverage in rural area has reached 65%. But this industrialized underground drainage network, they tend to ignore the indigenous morphology of the adaptive water system. And they all, the indigenous water system, they evolve from this close connection with the local geographical and hydraulic condition, but the industrial water infrastructure, they no longer respond to the local particularities. So this shift of water paradigm, which has a consequence, that is the degradation of the ecological system and the destruction of cultural site. It also led to dislocation of human populations and the disruption of natural water process. So today, source water shortage and water contamination are the two major challenges to the current water supply in rural China. Accordingly, China's freshwater reserve declined 13% between 2000 and 2009. And so the surface water and groundwater has also been seriously contaminated by industrial and human waste. So this is the, what's the condition, what's the context in when we, start to study these indigenous water landscape in the China. So the bigger question we have, of course, aligned with the theme of this, this lecture series is how can we assemble the future of the rural villages, which has this rich heritage, whose rich heritage has been built up over thousands of years. More specifically, for our research, we look at two specific questions. The first question is, what are the challenges encountered at the intersection of development and water conservation? And the second question, how can we preserve the function and meanings of indigenous water system that was created as a both physical and social cultural construct? So we use Hongcun village as a case study. The village is a World Heritage Site, which is designated by UNESCO in 2000. And the village has experienced rapid economic growth in the past decades. Just like many other traditional Chinese villages, Hongcun village has prioritized economic development when the farmland, forests, and natural lands were destroyed to make space for commercial infrastructures. And the village is a suitable case because it represents the many Chinese traditional village where human and nature, they have coexisted for more than 1,000 years. And their indigenous water system constitute a sense of connectivity and mutuality between human and nature through a long-term daily interaction. Hongcun village is a very popular tourist site nowadays. So its preservation and conservation practice reflect the opportunity and challenges of traditional Chinese village, which facing significant changes of the local hydrological landscape as a result of vulnerable natural environment, tourism development, and social economy transformation. So let's see where the village is located. For those who are, familiar with, the geography of China, you probably know that the village, though the place well, is it's in the Anhui Province. So the region is known as Huizhou region historically, because it's very unique cultural and social political characteristics. Huizhou merchants was an active and influential group in ancient China since the Song dynasty. And they accumulated great fortune and was able to build the region as an educational, art, and economy center of the country. So there's quite some, very well-known scholars, leaders from that area. The villages in Huizhou, they mostly nestled at the foot of Huangshan Mountain. and with the Xin'an River and its branches running through or near. So the location and layout of these villages, they were often determined by the feng shui applications. According to feng shui, water symbolized wealth. And in reality, water also provides much needed resources for the farming and living. So the villagers, they often build their settlements near the river, surrounded by the farmland. Some other, villages in the region like CD, which is also a very well-known tourist destination, and it's also a UNESCO designated World Heritage Site. So for for Hongcun village, it was built by the Wang clan in 1131. But only until the 1400s, with the guidance of feng shui master, the villagers, they constructed a water channel and expanded the village to the foot of Leigang Mountain. So if you look at the background, there's a mountain there, which is an extended mountain ridge of the Huangshan Mountain. There were 400 to 500 dwellings and 3,000 people living in Hongcun village during its peak days in Qing dynasty. But in the 1950s, because of the war and migrations, there were only 200 houses remained in the village. Since the 1980s, the local economy has started to develop, has started to grow, and that brought in a flux of residents. So nowadays, the Hongcun has around 450 dwellings, which occupy about 65% of the village lands. So it's almost kind of the same number of households living in the village as its peak time during the Qing dynasty. So despite its historical significance, Hongcun village had received little attention of its preservation by the 1990s. But it was not the sole case in the region. In fact, the Chinese government hadn't made much efforts to preserve the historic Huizhou region at that time. The first inventory of the National Historic Site was conducted in the late 1950s, by which around 180 architectures and other cultural artifacts were recognized and registered as national heritage sites. But the list didn't include any of the historic sites in Huizhou region. It was only until 1988 the Chinese government started to enlist these 3 historic sites in the region as a national heritage site, but all of them are buildings, architectures, significant, historic houses. So the preservation of the Hongcun village actually started to receive attention around in 1990s, when one of its historic houses in Yutang was transplanted to an American museum. So in the 1997, art historian Nancy Bellina, who was the curator of Chinese art at the Peabody Access Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, which is very close to Boston. So she purchased this 200-year-old house, and they dismantled the whole buildings and then shipped its part to the museum to be reassembled. So if you look at the picture at the right, that's what it looks like in Boston, in Salem. Can see they did a great job to preserve the look, the appearance of the building. Just they really are able to ship everything outside and inside the houses to Boston. And in 2003, the building has been opened for visitation. So I was there in the past summer. I just visited this his house from Huizhou. So this is some pictures show the interiors. You can see they really just transplanted or just have all the interior artifact. Everything was kind of a shipped to Boston. So the relocation of the historic house in the name of preservation was not a single case in the region, actually. Since the late 1990s, many antique collectors, they have purchased historic building in the village and then relocated to places such as warehouses. But since 1998, the county government has published a series of regulations to preserve the traditional dwellings in Hongcun village. But I have to say that even after that, there are still some cases for the buildings to be relocated, removed from their local context. This movie, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, I don't know if everybody have seen that. That was by Anhui in 2000, kind of an old movie now. But the movie has a few scenes was kind of taken in the village. That is really made the village very well-known tourist spot since then. It's also the same year the Hongcun was designated as a World Heritage Site. So while there have been some successful and unsuccessful attempt in preserving the historic buildings in Hongcun village, unfortunately, very few efforts have been made for the preservation and conservation of his historic landscape, including the indigenous waterscape. And the farmland and forests have been destroyed to make space for parking lot and other tourism-related facilities. And urbanization, land use change, and population growth led to water pollution and industrialization of the local water infrastructure. So these changing socio-hydrological conditions require a better understanding of the indigenous indigenous hydrologic infrastructural approach and its integrated social, cultural, and ecological meanings. So this is one of the, really the inspiration for us to start working on the conservation issues of the indigenous water system. And the water system is characterized by a series of linked water channels and ponds and their integration with the natural watersheds. There are 4 creeks running through the east and west side of Hongcun village, but the major one that provide water source for the village is the Xixi Creek, which is located at the west side of the village. So if you look at the map, you can see that here the Xixi Creek running at the west side of the village. So this is where the village is located, and there's this channel that introduce the water into the inner part of the city through these this is Arbor Water Channel, and then they go to Moon Pond, go to the lower part of the water channel, and then the South Lake. So that's the kind of the system they have to channeling the water into the village. So this map shows how the channel and the street actually they are really aligned. The water channel adopted a curvilinear form that turned around to get closer to the scattered houses. But most of the houses were located within 100 meters distance to the channel, and the layout of the water channel really decided how the local street layout has been constructed. All the houses. The villagers, they build their houses in rows and facing the channel and the streets. The channel was first constructed in 1410, and the layout has stayed unchanged since then. Only very minor changes has been made when there's new houses were constructed. So kind of change the course of the channel a little bit to just get closer to the houses. So I will show you some pictures of what this water system looks like. So Shi'etou is a dam kind of at the entry of the water channel. If you look at map, it's over here. So introducing the Xixi Creek River into the channel. And this is what the picture shows what it looks like. And the first, the upper river, the upper, sorry, the upper, sorry, I can see that. The upper level, the upper part of the channel was constructed in 1410. And you can see the, how it kind of runs through the alleys and how the road being constructed, and then houses at the side of, at the two sides of the alleys. And then the water go to the moon pond, which is the center of the village. And the reason they picked that spot as a moon pond, because there is a natural spring come from the ground. So it in feng shui application, it perceived as a very good fortune for the village. So the moon pond was built between 1403 and 1424. It's about 1,520 square meters. You can see that people, residents, they will still use the moon pond nowadays for, washing their stuff, cleaning stuff. This is a big picture show how the other side looks like. So on the right side, there is a Wang ancestor hall. So the moon pond really serves as the center of the whole village, culturally and geographically. The lower part of the stream is kind of a extension connecting the moon pond to the South Lake. These are the pictures show what it looks like. And there is a branch, it's called minor channel, so which is kind of a narrower, but when there's a flooding, there's able to kind of a detour the water to go to the minor channel, and then introduce and then channeling them into the South Lake. So the minor channel is about 1,200 meters long, and it's skinnier than the other part of the channel. The South Lake is a very big water body built in the village, which is built around 1600s. And it's about 20,000 square meters. If you look at the picture, you can see that it's a very scenic spot. It's a scenic spot in the village. Historically, lots of poets, artists, they will go to there, do the painting, and just got inspired to make some poems. So it's probably one of the most scenic and attractive location in the village. And the bridge was built in 1986 just to provide this pedestrian connection through the lake. Surrounding the South Lake, there are still a lot of farmlands around. So you can see here in the picture, they channeling the water, for irrigation purpose. They have these the outlet, so the water can go through those holes and then go to the farmland. And some household, they will channeling the water into their houses and have this small pond, and which they can where they can raise fish. Just have this pagoda, kind of a built next to it. So it's a very relaxing, pleasant spot within the households. So this is what the water channel, the indigenous water channel looks like in the village. But what are the changes to this water system? First of all, is the tourism development. Since the 1986, the villagers, they start to charging entry fee for some of the historic houses. But in the 1997, there is a company known as a Zhongkun Group, which is based in Beijing. They signed a 30-year contract with the local government to manage the village's tourism, which to an extent formalized the market and then facilitate rapid tourist growth in the region. And the local community, they were able to generate its own revenue through its joint venture partnership by creating tourism-related business, such as hotels, restaurants, and retail stores. And the number of tourists increased significantly in the 1990s to the 2000s. So from 1997 to 2001, the tourists increased 10 times. And from 2001 to 2004, the number of tourists also increased by more than 100%. So this changing economy structure has resulted in the significant changes of the land use. First, there has been an infrastructure expansion to support the tourist growth. From 1986 to 2000, the newly added architecture space in Hongcun village was almost 16,000 square meters. And starting in 2000, due to the recognition as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the village no longer allowed the new construction within its boundaries. However, a great number of construction appeared in the area near or around the village, with an 87% increase in constructed areas. And so at the same time was these, due to the expansion of the tourist infrastructure, there has been a decline in the agricultural land use. With the income of the service industry was almost 68% of the total income of the village, farming occupied only 20%. So these situation even get more affected because the construction of a modern water supply infrastructure in the village. In the 1950s and 60s, the villages has relied on wells for drinking water and also for the rely on the water channels for cleaning, just for living. But in the 1970s, most households, they own the motor pumped wells. But it wasn't until the 1986 when the first modern water plant in the region was built, and by 2005, almost all the households in the village, they have access to tap water. So since then, the wells have been abandoned, and the water channel no longer play a critical role in the everyday life of the people. They just stop using the water for drinking and for living. But of course, 83% of the household, they still reported using the water channel for laundry and household cleaning. But its importance and relevance to the village's everyday life have greatly diminished. So go back to our first question. What are the challenges encountered at the intersection of development and waterscape conservation? First of all, it's really the significant tourist growth, which placed great pressure on the local water system. There is insufficient water treatment infrastructure in the village. In 2004, the tourists generated about 577 tons of trash and 320,000 tons of wastewater. But unfortunately, the village, they don't have the capacity to take care of all these trash and waste because there's no modern sewage system being installed in the village. And the government kind of look into the opportunity, try to build a industrialized sewage system into the village, but you can see the street is so narrow, and the houses are so densely populated in the area, so there's a limitation. They just not able to put in a modern sewage system in the village, and so that become a big problem for the villagers when all the tourists, come in, and all, 75% of the villages household being converted to hotels. And there is also lack of effective regulation to control the water pollution. Many restaurants and households, they would discharge a large amount of wastewater directly into the water channel and the South Lake without using any treatment. And the trash was also just dumped into the water. But there's no regulation to be able to control this kind of behavior. Some pollutants, they were comprised of chemicals from the modern cleaning products. So because the residents still use the water for laundry and cleaning. So these are some, issues has to be addressed. Other than that, there is also no effective supervision for the tourist behaviors. For example, lots of students, art students, they visit the village regularly for painting and sketching lessons, but many of them just wash their pigments or pour the wastewater into the channel. So this kind of tourist behavior also brought in, pollutants into the water. The government has initiated some of the cleaning activities for the village, but lots of this approach kind of not really sensible to the ecological environment of the place. For instance, they have initiated the clearing of the riverbed for the Xixi Creek. But they use these mechanical engines to dig out all the dirt and rock, which help to lower the water level and prevent flooding. But at the same time, this bulldozer approach has destroyed the wildlife habitats and led to the degradation of the riparian ecosystem. So these are some challenges, mainly really based on these, mainly grounded on these tourist growth and the insufficient approach to deal with all the problems. So how can we preserve the function and meanings of this indigenous water system that was created as a both physical and social cultural construct? So in our research, we really look into these different dimensions of the approach we should use to preserve the water system. First of all is the tourism. So how can we manage the tourism development in the village? So the development of tourism and environment conditions, they affect each other mutually. On one hand, tourism can be a promoter or degrader to the environment. On the other hand, environmental condition can affect tourism either in a positive or negative way. So tourism should be designed and administered in a way that will lead to the improvement in the environment and in human welfare rather than an environmental trade-off. Regarding the tourist impact on the environment, many researchers, they start to examine the optimal tourism environmental carrying capacity, which prescribe the appropriate number of travelers a tourist destination can accommodate without compromising its environmental quality. But the measurement and variables used in analyzing the capacity have varied among different studies. But overall, it was agreed that the factors to be considered should include both the natural ecological environment and social cultural as well as economic conditions. And there is also some proposal to divide the tourism area into zones. So each zones have different ecological functions so that the rational ecological planning, including regulating the number of tourists, could be managed accordingly based on the condition, the size, and then the overall ecological, social, cultural condition of the particular zone. In the case of Hongcun village, the current impact suggests that the carrying capacity of tourism infrastructure should be managed in order to avoid environmental degradation, especially when the modern sewage system is not available, and the number of sites of lodging and other tourist facilities such as restaurants should be controlled in a way that does not exceed the waste treatment capacity of the village. In Hongcun village, the joint partnership with the Zhongkun group in managing the local tourism has facilitated a fast tourism growth. Unfortunately, the partnership has also generated many controversies. The villagers have complained that their share with the profits of the tourist enterprises was very minor. So the company and the government, they took the majority of the tourist income without investing the revenue back to the village's conservation and preservation. Many villagers, they live in dilapidated houses, but didn't have the sufficient funds to repair their houses. So that is, we need to involve these local population in these in the environmental conservation. There are 4 levels of community empowerment: economy, psychology, social, and political. So in the economic level, we should adopted a community-based approach, so which involved the distribution of economy benefits among the local community. So the benefits should be shared with the community. And at the same time, we should preserve the tradition and the sense of well-being. So that's a psychological level. People should feel attached to their place, to their home. And for social level, there needs a more social development project in the village. And politically, we should include more diverse interest group in the decision-making process. So a bottom-up approach could lead to a high local benefits and local participation of environmental conservation. So we propose this participation of the local community in tourism management, which is important in ensuring sustainable tourism development, while at the same time enabling the community to enhance the local livelihood and become more responsible towards their environment. Land use is another key factor will affect the water quality. The agricultural activities on the upstream of the land has generated fertilizers and pesticides, while when the forest has been destroyed to make space for the agricultural land. The loss of forest has increased amount of sediment that flowing into the watersheds and degraded the water quality. There's a researcher, researcher Wang, he published in 2007, he has argued that it's important to consolidate the agricultural development of rural villages in order to preserve the local lifestyle and vitality. So agricultural landscape can be managed to enhance the biodiversity with simultaneously positive livelihood outcome. In the Hongcun village, the loss of agricultural land to the tourism development has generated the significant impact on the local watershed, but turning the natural green area into farmland could also have an equally negative impact on the local ecological system. For instance, in the Lega Mountain, during the 1950s, hundreds of acres of forest and natural vegetation were cleared for agricultural use. And this overuse and mismanagement of the pesticides and fertilizer and led to the poisoning of the surface water and soil. without the protection of a forest, lake and mountain has experienced soil erosion, which result in a large amount of sediment in the, kind of go to the local watershed. So a strategic planning to rehabilitate the forest land on the upstream side and the ecological sensitive management system for the agricultural production are equally important in conserving the local water system. So this concept of eco-agriculture could work very well in the local context. Eco-agriculture, they mimic the structure and function of the natural ecosystem and provide the ecosystem service such as food production, pollination, water purification, social formation, and aesthetic and recreation functions, which can help to minimize the agricultural pollution and enhance the habitat quality for the village. So these are some suggestions we have for how we are projecting the future land use in the village. And from the social and cultural framework, we know that of all the environmental and social criteria, place making and the sense of place is the most binding and fundamental factor in stabilizing and revitalizing the community. In Hongcun village, there was a long tradition or social custom that used to maintain the water quality. So in the earlier time, they have the time slot that will decide that the kind of activity that you can happen for the in the water channel. Like in the morning time, you can only use the water for cooking and drinking, and in the afternoon, and then you can use the water for laundry, for washing, cleaning the household. So they have these very strict rules historically that used to preserve the water quality. Unfortunately, because the introduction of the modern water system, the residents, they no longer no longer use the traditional, the social customs in the future. They kind of become all the changes led to this kind of a more irresponsible use of the local water sources. So this loss of tradition and custom, which at the same time also lead to the disconnection between people and their place. So to conserve the indigenous water system, we need to reconnect the people with their place and the local landscape. To do so, it requires a good understanding of the local residents' memories and stories of the waterscape, because these have constituted the vital threads in the sense of place and the local social cultural fabric. In addition, the traditional water infrastructure also demands social discipline. So environmental regulation, official or unofficial, has been found to be effective in mitigating the environmental problems. So the village should revive its communal rules and customs regarding the water use, and simultaneously reinforce environmental management through creating educational programs and instituting the official regulations for their water management. All right, so go back to our bigger question. How can we assemble the future of the rural villages, which has thousands of years of history? First of all, we should understand that the rural landscape, especially the historic landscape, it demonstrates the integrating the force of nature and culture. So the indigenous water system in the Hongcun village is also a great example of how nature and culture, they are integrated forces in shaping the landscape. The urbanization and tourism growth is unquestionably a key challenge of the conservation of the rural landscape in the new century. Current development efforts has been fragmented, disproportionately focusing on tourism and economic growth. So the dramatic change in land use and local hydrological pattern have caused the environmental degradation and water pollution, and all the, the industrialization of local water infrastructure, the transforming relation between human and nature, and the loss of sense of place and place attachment. All these issues generate a compelling ground for re-examining the contemporary water management system. And to preserve the local waterscape as both a cultural and natural heritage requires a full engagement in the holistic approach, which integrate the ecological, utilitarian, and social cultural construct of the landscape. The continued investment in tourism and urban infrastructure should be challenged by a more comprehensive development and management model that place a higher priority on sustainable goals that will support the village and help it to endure and flourish in the indefinite future. And we should also take into consideration the participation of the local community in the planning, design, and implementation of the village infrastructure. Consultation and involvement of the local people are a major components that can help to revive respect for tradition and facilitate a sustainable use and water resources. The indigenous water system has contributed significantly to sustainable and resilient water management in rural China historically. So understanding the water system as a multifunctional landscape is conducive to a low-cost solution that will contribute to resilient water management. The modern technology should build on the traditional systems, keeping intact their ecological rationality. The integration of the hydrological cycle and the ecological and cultural systems should be preserved to reintegrate the water use while maintaining the social and ecological health and human well-being in the rural villages. So these are some approach based on our case study that we examined, and then we believe that would be important to conserve the water system, the indigenous water system for a long term and for the future. Well, thank you. So that's my talk.
Thank you so much, Jolly. This is a great, interesting study. I think I'm sure our students actually would, a lot of them worked on water systems, and this is a very important topic that a lot of us are focusing on. So I think it's a really great study, based on detailed observation, right, of the material change in Hongcun, and also your knowledge about environmental histories of the areas, which is a very important intersections of different types of knowledge. And it brings up really a lot of important questions of landscape conservation and the challenges confronted by villages, I think, facing the pressure of tourism growth. So I would just maybe start with a couple of questions to kick it off, and then I'll pass on to the floor. I'm interested to, well, first of all, these are, maybe I'll start with a couple questions relating to methods, right? Maybe first, maybe you can share with us a little bit about your methods of inquiry, of your research. Because I think that you're based in the US, and then you spent maybe short trips to China in a particular moment in time, observing the changes in there. And then you did this research. So I maybe want to understand a little bit about that process and the challenges. The second one is that in the beginning, you mentioned that Hongcun is representative case studies, or legitimate case studies to understand what's happening. I'm interested in that also because it's also a World Heritage Site. So of course that's from 2000 onward. So it's also an atypical site at the same time, right? Because it experiences very intensified dynamics of tourism development with hundreds of times or more people moving in there compared to other villages. So the ways in which this village is being valued and perceived and managed and is interacting with the outside world is also quite different from other villages. They have the same histories and going through some of the same challenges of pollutions and so forth. But this particular case is also much more intensified. So maybe you can speak about that in terms of the different tensions between the different sites and how this villages could allow us to understand deriving strategies to meaningfully conserve and maybe kind of be the ways in which you conceive these strategies can be also useful to look at other sites.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for the question. The first question, the methodology. You are right. I based in US. So it's hard for me to, travel China for an extended time to collect the data. So I have to say that Professor Chen, who's from Anhui University, we has a great a partnership working on this project. The majority of the data collection was conducted by himself and his students. So we did a lot of survey, measurement in the village for the water channel, and they also conducted several interviews with the local authorities, the residents. So this has been a very important information for us for how we understand the current challenges of the water conservation. And for my end, I really focus on archive research. So we did a very extensive archive research by looking into the newspapers and the government documentations, just anything we can find related to the historical involvement of the water channel. So I think this is a great teamwork. Is a combination of the archive and then the field observation and then the interview. For your second question, I agree. I think Hongcun village, although it's kind of a typical village that has been attractive tourist destination, but at the same time, it's a World Heritage Site. It has a more intense, development in there because the amount of tourists able to attract. But I have to say, it's the issue that we have been discussed here, like the bigger context for the rural changes, the economy change that result into the landscape, the change of the landscape, the water system. I think that's it's representative for lots of the issues has been faced by many Chinese villages, especially in that region, for Huizhou region. So it's not a sole case like a CD village. It's also a very popular tourist site, and there's quite a lot. Village has a similar challenges in Zhejiang, in other places, because the issue about tourist growth, probably not much international tourists, but domestic tourists, there has been a very significant pressure on their infrastructure system. And the issue we talk about, the land use change, by losing the agricultural land, losing the natural, area for the infrastructure construction for the built environment. I do see that as a very common problem faced by many Chinese villages. So the approach that we propose here, how we projecting the future of this rural village. I think Hongcun could still be a very valid case study, and its problem is the issues that is representative for lots of challenges faced by the contemporary rural villages in China.
Great. Can I actually maybe just follow up with one small question? I know that Hongcun was designated a World Heritage Site in 2000, right? That was like 23 years ago. But then in the last 10, 15 years, the concept of cultural landscapes that has been kind of a big thing. And China has also been lining up certain sites to be listed, right, as the World Heritage Sites. And I think some of the local governments, different levels of the government, have different ways of learning about conservation, and they've been participating in this. So I wonder if you see any changes in terms of some of the improvement projects that they've been doing, such as you said, they were trying to sanitize the channel and so forth. Maybe there was also mistakes, but have there been any learning lessons at the different levels of the government participating in this process?
That is a very good question. So we visited the site right before COVID. Lots of our data collection was conducted before COVID. When we were there, we can see this awareness of, the environmental preservation. As I mentioned in the slides, tourism and environmental condition, they affect each other. So if you have the environment being, like not being kind of affected, being damaged in a way, might affect the tourism, right? People will see that, oh, there's not as beautiful as before, or there's a pollution here, right? Not as attractive. So that would definitely affect the tourism. I think the local government, they aware of that. So that's why I think there's lots of initiative try to keep up the environment and then maintain the facility. We actually have an observation. The part of the village that has more tourists, visited, because like the Moon Palm, that area actually is much cleaner than the rest part of the village. So you can see lots of effort they tried, to put into maintaining the environment for the tourism purpose. But I would say overall, there is what is missing is a strategic plan to really look at the longer vision of what the future this village are. I think lots of efforts nowadays is still a short term. You really just look at the economy, right? The tourism growth and the economy benefits. There are some awareness of the environmental problems, but overall, I think it's really urgent to have a strategic long-term plan that really take into consideration of all the different factors, not just the physical environment, but also the ecological and particularly cultural, has not really been quite on the table yet, because I think there's more work need to be done to recall the oral history of the place, what are the memory of the place, because now lots of these kind of heritage, I will say they are gone. Some historic traces from the past, they are gone. We need a better system to recall them and to preserve those memories, culture of the place. So I will say overall, there are some efforts, but there's still a long way to go to be able to really address the challenges we are facing today.
Yeah, but just a final question. I'm curious. So are you and your colleagues, are you actually participating in proposing strategies for the village, or based on this research, or are you actually engaging with that?
We are now we talk to the people. We did especially Hongcun. It's a long-term project for him. Work with the village. This is not a sole project. I believe he has his student worked in the village for quite many years, has some other design project, etc. So the proposal we have here, not really like officially, turn to the village government. It's more about a reflection of, what should be done. So I think the work we do here, like the talk we have today, the publication we have in the Journal of Landscape Architecture. By the way, this paper has been published in Journal of Landscape Architecture. Any of you who are interested, yeah, you can find the article there.
We will make sure
so
that
I think these efforts, thank you. So these efforts are all a way that to raise the awareness of the preservation, conservation is not a sole issue about just the natural environment or the cultural. It's really critical to combining all these different factors and then to have a holistic approach for the preservation.
Okay, great. We'll make sure that we're going to share the links to your article. So now we have some time. We're going to open up the floor for questions. So please feel free to put your comments, your questions in the chat. But the best is to open up your microphone and we can have a conversation directly. So anyone wants to just open your mic to ask questions. Maybe we can stop sharing so we can see everybody. Anyone want to ask the first questions for Chuo?
I'm wondering, anybody in your in HKU has worked on the rural villages in China? Because I think I heard some presentation past years in Silao somewhere. I do see there's some research on the China.
There certainly are. But we do have someone who want to ask the questions here. Ting.
Sure.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Please.
Can you hear me? I'm Alice, and thank you, Professor Li. Your sharing is really interesting. As I am from Anhui, and I have spent, I think, a half year to stay in a rural village nearby Hongcun, is Bishan. So I think some of the two villages have in common. Like people would appreciate the built heritage there and may ignore the water system or the waterscapes. So the conservation also, like the people would maybe invest more to renovate the buildings to attract either the tourism or the local residents. But they don't have the idea or they don't have the knowledge like they should preserve the overall landscape. So I'm really interested about how you identify the problems here and how you feel about like Hongcun is declared as a World Heritage Monument, but actually when you visit it on ground, is many critics about the over tourism issues. And yeah, so that's my question and reflection here after hearing the lecture.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. That's a very good question. You are right. During our research, we do see these ignorance in general about the landscape conservation. Loss of preservation. When we talk about preservation, I mean, usually we think that just preserve the buildings, the architecture, especially in Hongcun, there are lots of significant historic houses. Lots of efforts has been placed in those architecture or artifacts in general. So the landscape itself, for somehow they didn't realize it's a very valuable heritage to the village. So this is why when we look at, it's not just for in China, I would say worldwide, waterscape is a very critical resources and to people, natural resources to people. In India, they have a lot of similar challenges for how we balance development and then the landscape, in particular water conservation. So when we visit the site, we realize there is a lack of awareness of landscape as a heritage, not just as a natural heritage, but also as a cultural heritage. So that's how we start this project. We really try to emphasize and or promote awareness of culture and nature. They should be integrated when we talk about conserving the rural landscape, the historic landscape in the Chinese villages. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, part of it. Actually, when you mentioned like the function of the village is changing over the years, like from the very beginning is people living here, and now it's more like people working here but not living here for a long time. So there is a similar village, it's named Wuzhen. So it's more like the situation here is worse than Hongcun. Like people will work here in the daytime and leave and go home to maybe they choose another village. So yeah, it's kind of Disneyland now.
That is very true. We found that almost 75% of the villagers, they converted their household to hotels as a kind of a tourist lodging. And now, I think lots of, because of course the houses there, they are mainly, the old houses. Lots of people will choose to live outside the village into the new condominiums, new buildings. So if you look at Hongcun, I believe you're very familiar with that. Outside Hongcun, there's lots of new development. So they have the modern housing, better, sanitary kind of a system. But interesting, they try to mimic the style of the Hongcun, try to make it look traditional. I do see there that, these kind of changes are happen, right? Hongcun might in a, a certain time in the future, might not be a living community anymore. People might just use, make it a more like a museum or tourist destination. So that's why I think promoting the agricultural land use is very important, because we need to preserve the traditional lifestyle in the place, instead of just, just make it just like a museum, or people only work in the service industry instead of really farming, work on the land. So, but of course it will be challenging. It will be challenging when we're facing this larger change of our economy, structure. In America, there is a lot of discussion about the shrinking cities and also the towns declining. Towns in Mississippi, in particular, in Delta, we have a lot of rural village. They will disappear very soon because, there's no job opportunity, and, younger people, they will just go to other place to find a job. And, that's a lot. That's another level of, I would say, challenge for the rural village. But of course, Hongcun is kind of different in a way because it's still able to generate lots of economic interest in the area. But in the long term, that is a very good question for us to consider. What is the future? So will there still be a living community, or it will be just, pure tourism industrial spot for generating economic benefits? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ting, you have a question?
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me this time? Sorry, my
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So nice to see you, Li Chuo. So I'm a PhD student from the Division of Landscape Architecture in HKU. So I think I'm quite interested about your presentation, and my question kind of related with the previous students asked one. So because we all know like Hongcun is very famous in China, and I noticed that there is a kind of debate on China's national media, which is about the post-UNESCO effects to compare the Hongcun and the surrounding village called Nanping. So I guess that is quite interesting because Hongcun, of course, it has been rewarded as a UNESCO site, but the Nanping village just very near the Hongcun area, I think. So they basically have the similar indigenous water system. And because people now all go to the Hongcun, Nanping village actually gets to preserve the indigenous water system better. And the residents in Nanping actually still keep the old way, as you say, that to manage the water collectively with different timing. And I think so. I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think about this kind of two sides? One is with the UNESCO award, and another one is like without the UNESCO award, but it's kind of turns out to preserve the better. And what is exact effects you think like the UNESCO title actually give to the Chinese Asian villagers in terms of preserving these cultural landscapes? Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question, Wang Ting. I would say it's a two-sided coins. I think a recognition by the UNESCO as a World Heritage Site definitely, bringing lots of a positive effect on the village, because we realize, only after the UNESCO, it being recognized as a UNESCO site, the village start a new policy. They start to place limits on the new constructions within the village. So they know that, that's a valuable heritage to them. They want to preserve that, and the new construction will destroy that kind of historical integrity of the site. So, but at the other side of coin, just like what you say, it does, bringing lots of tourists and the pressure on the infrastructure. I think that's all, my talk has been about. My own take of this problem is careful management. I think a great strategic management plan will just address these two sides of problem, right? You have the resources, publicity, and all the probably the financial capacity to be able to repair the old houses and then keep out the environment. And I think that's really the good side. But at the same time, the environmental degradation, that needs a strategy plan to address that. So I think it's hard to say which one is better or worse. It's really for government, for the designer, planner, work together to create a very, as I said, holistic plan to really consider all the factors, also involve the local population in the planning management process. I think that's very critical for the future of those villages. But, if without all the, recognition of its historical significance, probably, like I said, lots of village, they will gradually disappear, just like many other villages in that area. People will start to move out if there's no, new economy, infrastructure to support the living. Yeah, so I don't know what's your take of that, but in general, I feel that for the Hongcun village, probably it's lucky in a way that it has very strong economy revenue to be able to support the living of the villagers, but it needs management, it needs planning. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the answer. Actually, I also have another question about the tensions between the kind of modern water infrastructure improvement and the ecological kind of destruction that you also mentioned in your paper. So because in your paper, also the presentation, you kind of mentioned that because of their modern kind of renovation of this water infrastructure, such as like sanitize the creek, actually bringing the danger to the local habitats, like wildlife habitats. So I'm wondering, is there any kind of updated research going on about like this kind of wildlife habitats or the ecology in this Asian Chinese village that actually have this impacts on, or it's ongoing research?
Ongoing research. At this point, I don't have that continuous research on that because COVID, basically, I can't travel to China. But Professor Chen and I, we do have a plan to work, on the issue in larger scale. I think that is like a modern water infrastructure. I will say it's a we have to recognize those infrastructure really help improve the life quality of the villagers, right? Improve the health. The water is a very important resource for living. I think that's a great benefit of providing clean water to the people. But this ignorance of the local particularities and this abandon of the indigenous water system, all these issues, of course, generate some other problem for the village. At this point, I don't have ongoing research, but I'm definitely very interested to continue work on the water issue in the rural China, probably in other places, not just Huizhou, but look at really the bigger picture of, just like all the question Cecilia and you all has been asked, there is a need to address this bigger issue of how we face all the changes in the future. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. No worries. I think it's definitely a very good interest area to look at, like in the future, about these tensions, ecology and the conservation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from Linda. Linda.
Hi, wonderful presentation. This was amazing. Lots of great information available through your research. I have a question. Your particular position as a researcher based in the United States, looking at a project in China, and you touched upon stakeholder and community involvement in the decision-making process and placemaking in particular. And I'm curious to know, from where you are seeing both approaches to stakeholder engagement, are there crossovers or lessons you learned from one place that you can adapt to the other, or things that just don't work within the context of a village in China?
That is a very good question. I would say at this point, based on our interview with the villagers and kind of interaction with the local people, we had the impression, and the residents, the villagers, they not quite involved in the decision-making process yet. Of course, lots of them involved in the business side of the village management. They usually is the owner of the hotel, or they have a restaurant in the local area. They kind of work as a tour guide, etc. They are very active, participate in the tourism development in the village. But overall, in the decision-making process, is very much is just the local government. Those few people will make decision of what the like especially in the construction side, what is needed in the village. So I feel there is a huge missing component for sustainable development. Most importantly, like the economy benefits, there is a large revenue come into the village by the tourism development, but there's lots of places are government owned or owned by the, private firms. The local residents, their share of the economy benefits is really minor. So that generates lots of problems. There was a cases the resident, they will just, be very hostile to the tourists in the village. So go back to your question about how I see this local participation, how that work in the village. I think just like many cases in United States, we need to have regular community meetings that inviting all the people of, from the different interest group that can sit together to, inform them the decision. And then, asking their feedback and then asking their perceptions. I think that's very important for the leader and the people who able to decide the future of the park. Their decision is grounded on the collective, the understanding of what the future of the village should go. But I know that in China, it's kind of hard at this point because the structure is really just top-down structure so far for all the, management and administration. I would say there's a long way to go, but I think lots of evidence shows only when you involve the local people and then share the profit, share the economy interests, have the social program, and encourage their responsibility, being attached to the site. These are really key components for a sustainable future of the village.
Yeah. Just real quickly, have you considered linking the heritage not just from an economic perspective in placemaking for sustainability, but also linking, especially since it's waterways, with SDG 6, which focuses on clean water and sanitation?
I'm sorry, can you elaborate a little bit?
Okay, so I was part of ECOMOS's development of policies for heritage within the Sustainable Development Agenda, specifically addressing sustainable development goals.
Mm-hmm.
And your project is a prime candidate to really showcase the role that heritage can have in moving towards addressing some of the sustainable development goals. And specifically in your case, because you look at waterways, there's a clear direct link to SDG 6, which looks at clean water and sanitation. We can talk later if you want to discuss this some more.
Yeah, that definitely will be some interest in, I definitely will be interested to look into more of, that as a heritage side, how we can manage that in the, for water quality, etc. Yeah. Well, thank you for letting me know. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, maybe we can take one last question. This is from Sally.
Hi, I'm particularly interested in how the development of tourism in this village impact their original livelihoods. So you mentioned people like they only work for the tourism development, and I wonder, would that actually lead to some abandoned agriculture fields, or like their whole life has changed into another pattern? So that leads to the question, like, when we conserve a village, we usually look at the architecture. This place is beautiful, but should we also consider the relationship of their original practice associated with the land itself? So how about those landscapes, like agriculture fields, or even in a larger landscape system, for example, watershed or whole region? Should that should we also consider that?
Well, that's for sure. Yeah, I think for our case study is really just, we just look at these indigenous water system, but the Xixi Creek, it's the major problems. We talk about in the upstream land, how the loss of the forest, led to the, soil erosion of the mountain, and how that, really take a lot of sediment and pollutants into the water. Water is a regional issue. Yeah, it's never able to, segregated from the surrounding. So yeah, I do believe it's very important that we have a regional perspective when we want to study the water issues in the rural China. Yeah, I in the future, if I have the opportunity, I definitely will want to look more into that. Probably not just the particular village, but really look at the whole watershed, the Xixi Creek, to see how the upper land, lower land, and how that, new development, how that all kind of combined to create the impact on the local watershed, and what are the changes, what are the solutions or approaches we should take to preserve the local, in general, the natural water system. Yeah. And sorry, what was your first question?
So
on the lifestyle.
Yeah, lifestyle and their livelihoods. Are they still participating in agriculture?
They are. I think I think in my in our research we did kind of observe there is around 60% of the income, the village income, comes tourism, but there are still 20% is from the agricultural. There are people still farming, but I would say that changed significantly, because when we were there, we found that lots of farmland, they are not really managed in a way for the production purpose. It's really for tourists. They can come in just for the orchard, they can pick fruits, and they can sell the fruit to the tourists. So it's a very interesting dynamic, how the agricultural land has been managed nowadays. It's just like, in China we have lots of like a 农家乐. It seems like that, it's still working. I mean, it's still functioning, it's still producing, but at the same time it become a tourist spot. It's not like a pure agricultural production site. What will happen in the long term? I believe that loss of the agricultural land and the practice, it does affect the lifestyle a lot for the people. That's why it's very important to consolidate the agricultural land use in the local area, because that's a key component to keep the traditional lifestyle and also the vitality of the village. But we talk about agriculture could be managed in a way. We talk about the concept of eco-agriculture, because agriculture could be very negative to the environment at some way, right? With all the fertilizer, all the chemicals, it needs management. Yeah, needs plan to make it more environmentally friendly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
So I think that's appropriate conclusion to the lecture. It is now 8:35, so we have to bring the lecture to a close. Thanks again, Chuo, and I'm going to pass this to Natalia, who's going to announce our next lecture. Natalia.
Yeah, thank you, Chuo, for your lecture.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, no, it was really helpful for, I think a lot of our thesis students are looking for similar issues. I wanted to announce the next lecture. I've mentioned it in the poster, but in the previous poster at the beginning, but here, so just to remind you that on Tuesday, February 28th, we will have Montira Horiyan Gura, una cool lecturing at the Knowles building at 6:30. Oh, this one is wrong, but it's 6:30. sorry, I got the wrong one here. So it's 6:30, not 7:30. It's 6:30 to 8. So I hope to see you all there. She'll be dealing also with issues of heritage sustainability. So hopefully our students and conservation students will be back, and whoever else is here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I hope I can be in the lecture, but
You can come
thank
to
you.
that.
Really
We have one more online.
Oh, okay. Well, definitely
that-
send me the link. I really want to
that's going to be
participate.
March 2nd. But yeah, this one is going to be face to face. Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Chuo. Thank you.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.